I was just thinking, what else can I say after the uh, comprehensive presentation by Sashi, who's covered almost every aspect. Though, however, I have some ideas that I would like to share. First of all, while agreeing with all that has been said, and the context of the seminar today, that during the lockdown, several sections of our population, uh, in fact, especially the working class, suffered, I mean, in fact, huge setbacks in several forms. The In fact, what happened, within the media was not discussed, and it was not discussed also because it wasn't shared in as part of media activities, as part of media dissemination activities. While I sort of agree that in fact, there can't be in fact any disagreement with the fact that the kind of challenges that the media has had to face. When I say media, I mean the entire gamut of the media, that is print, electronic, as well as digital. But the attacks on the digital media have been in fact most severe, for obvious reasons, because the maximum of critical voices in fact do emerge from the online digital news media space. So all that Shashi was mentioning about the OTT rules, the new IT rules, etc., in fact have a certain bearing and a context to what's happening. And so therefore the media as such had suffered what I'd say, a double kind of a whammy. It was like a pincer attack, which is one from the government, and one from within. Now, what was not discussed much was, in fact, what happened within. The lockdown began in March, and several, in fact, media organizations, including leading mainstream and what is called legend media, uh, from beginning from March onwards, and which carried on till maybe June and August. We had lots of, in fact, media organizations sending what is called internal communications to their employees, saying that they're going through a bad time, and that it was a time for making sacrifices. But everybody knew that those sacrifices are not going to be borne equally, because of the kind of differential wage structures that are within the media. And then it was generally said, because revenues had come down, especially print revenues in the print media had come down drastically. Circulation had been affected. As you all know, there was this big rumor that COVID spreads through newspapers, and so several people just stopped subscribing. They stopped subscribing, as a result of which, and which continued till for quite some months. So as a result of which, several newspapers had to sort of print fewer pages because circulation wasn't as good, and advertisements also stopped coming, because advertisements would come, in fact, only if there was circulation, which in turn sort of meant, if there were buyers for their products, would sort of translate into that. So we had, of course, the concerns were genuine. There was a genuine dip in circulation, and ad revenues had taken a had plummeted. But then I think employees, within the media, were not prepared for the kind of sacrifices that were expected of them. Sacrifices which, of course, ranged from salary cuts, which was okay, sort of justified, I think, given the situation. And But then there were delays in the payments of salaries also, and not only that, several people lost their jobs also. Several editions closed down, just with the just sort of, not exactly overnight, but very short notices were given. And And that in turn sort of created a lot of uncertainty, I think, within the media, among media persons about the kind of future that awaited them. So while we talk about free media, yes, and also in a democracy, which is extremely ideal, but how can a free media exist when the conditions are, let's say, unfree, where the freedom to your right to be employed is not there? So I think those kind of pressures, in fact, within the mainstream media to a very large extent, also had a let's say had a chilling effect, the other kind of chilling effect, not the kind that the that was imposed by the government. So you had this pincer kind of an effect. You had the government doing this on the one hand, sort of booking journalists under sedition, for uploading photographs, for posting comments, for even maybe sort of suggesting that that a chief minister of a particular state might be changed because he or she hadn't handled the COVID situation well, and the journalist was booked under sedition. This was the case, for Gujarati editor. And we had the case of Siddharth Varadarajan, of the Wire. He sort of retracted his comment, and yet an FIR is filed by the UP police, who traveled all the way from Lucknow during the lockdown, because lockdown restrictions didn't apply to the police, but they applied to citizens. So of course, laws were misused a lot against citizens, and also against the media. So in fact, there is some amount of documentation that suggests that there's this organization called um, um, anyhow I think I've noted it, but I can't really recall. Now they sort of made an assessment that during the lockdown there were at least 55 instances of physical assault, of arrests, of threats to arrest, etc., against journalists who had reported on COVID. So we had those kind of excesses, and on the other hand, we had the other kind of excesses which were happening, within the media, which were not reported at all. Uh, they were People were laid off, en masse. I mean, of course, it may not have been in huge numbers, but 50, 100, and as I said, editions were closed. So that also meant that people had to go. People were told to resign, on WhatsApp, say by phone, by telephone, etc. And failing which, I mean, if they did not resign, then they would be terminated. And like most citizens, journalists also do not want to approach the courts, because it involves a certain legal cost. It involves also taking sort of time off, in fact considerable time off, and then it also sort of affects your future job prospects, because if you're known as a troublemaker, then obviously all doors are closed, because it's a very, very closed community, the arena of media employment, where in fact a lot is transferred by word of mouth, in terms of opportunities within the media. So I think nobody wanted to risk that, but there were several people who had to forgo their jobs, essentially, and were told just to be quiet about it, not to really make a song and a dance. Now, as far as the salary cuts went, there was no assurance from media organizations that those cuts would be restored once things sort of got normalized. There was no assurance of any kind, and so one had to, yes, work from home, and also bear all those additional infrastructural, in fact, costs that came with working from home. So as far as in fact, I remember Shataki saying that salaries were, protected for people like us who work from home, but I do not think that was the case as far as people, in the media were concerned. So those kind of benefits were withdrawn, essentially. So everybody agreed, yes, to work from home, but then there was clearly, it was still work. It was not leisure. It was still work, and journalists continue to produce content, And but then these issues have not been really sort of discussed, and I don't think there's any likelihood of them sort of being discussed also, because the reasons that were mentioned. And as you all know, that despite the great public appeals by the prime minister as well as the labor minister, that nobody should be sacked, nobody should be retrenched, and that employers should be compassionate towards the employees. And in fact there were some custom duties were relaxed as far as newsprint was concerned, because the INS, the newspaper society organization, they wrote to the government saying that that they have that suffered, or there is in fact suffered losses up to 15,000 crores, because ads were not really coming in clearly. And therefore there was a request to reduce the customs duty on print, on newsprint. So it was complied with. But as I said, I mean, it suited everybody. It suited the government too, because here um, you had a media which was under attack from within, and then you had this attack from outside. And therefore complicitness is what suited everybody. So there was a complicity and there was a complicitness of a certain kind. Now I just wondered, when so many tax concessions could be given to the corporates, why couldn't the government also sort of give similar concessions, to the media, in order that such that it did not have taken such steps in the first place. But obviously it was not the concern of the government. The government was all about regulating, and regulated it in the form of these rules that came up recently. So as I said, these attacks which have happened from outside, and plus these attacks from within the media, they sort of they sort of created a certain culture of silence. But at the same time, it was also sort of gratifying to an extent that media persons, they did come together, and they spoke up against each on each occasion that the clause of sedition was evoked against somebody, or UAPA was just imposed just for the heck of it, etc. They did speak up. But at the same time, it would not be sort of incorrect to say that there has been a good deal of diffidence also, in fact, within the media to speak out as much as it should. I think because of combination of these conditions you know uh, that I just mentioned. Uh, Other than this, I think the role of the courts, yes, I mean, the courts, yes, they did pave the way for asking the government to sort of regulate the media. It could have come in the context of the Sudarshan TV case, but then it gave a handle to the government also to say, yes, we are going to regulate. Now, why should the government regulate only selectively? Now, this issue of solidarity also comes up, because the online news media, they did not lay off, or they did not retrench, or sack people, to the extent that the mainstream media did. But all the pressure was on them, because they sort of continued to come up with critical with stories critiquing policies. They gave space to a lot many writers who would otherwise not get space in the mainstream media, to talk about issues that are not talked about. And so therefore their regulation was of paramount importance. But then there was a complete lack of solidarity shown by the various associations of media owners, when these OTT rules, when these new IT rules came up. And it should have been the case, I think. So this is something which I felt was sort of lacking, the kind of so it became just a question of a few online digital media publishers going to court. And of course it's not few. They are few in the sense they're few in number, but in terms of outreach and in terms of news dissemination, they're quite important. and they have quite a reach. And there was absolute lack of any consultation, which we all know, which sort of preceded these rules. The government, and we had the government, the INB minister, and also the IT minister, you know constantly sort of telling us, freedom of speech is not absolute. There are reasonable restrictions which is there, as part of the fundamental right to speech, and that those reasonable restrictions you have to be observed. It's not a complete carte blanche as far as freedom of speech is concerned. So we had to listen to all those things also. But at the same time, I think a lot of churning of thought, has been happening as to what would what would happen if one sort of uh, uh, didn't intervene, when such policies come into place. I think many people do not even realize the implications, outside those who are getting affected by it. As far as the IT rules go, the as far as the print media and the electronic media are concerned, they feel, oh, we aren't bothered by this. But then they would stand to be affected because of cross media ownership, because several of them have interests in the online digital media too. So ultimately, the content there, that they put out is also going to be monitored. So then they should ideally, have an interest in ensuring that this doesn't that this is sort of challenged. While others have challenged it, they should ideally sort of join in. But then because it's a competitive space, because it's a competitive industry, uh, and everybody's fighting for the same pie, whether it's government ads or whether it's private industry ads. So that, I think, sort of limits the kind of solidarities that should have ideally, you know, um, sort of happened. So these challenges on the external side, as I said, the government will sort of continue to do these things, in the name of public order, or in the name of protecting the country's sovereignty. Any statement can be sort of distorted, in spite of the Supreme Court, giving several court orders saying what constitutes sedition and what doesn't. Sort of merely by sort of giving a speech, which does not result in disruption of the public order. It does not amount to sedition, or which does not involve call to arms, does not constitute sedition. In spite of that, I mean, this goes, somebody will file FIR somewhere. But I think the final straw was reached in the early part of this year, when six journalists, and all of them, big names, were booked under sedition and UAPA. So I think then it really struck everybody that this government can go to any extent, and therefore one sort of needs to come together. So some solidarity was did emerge on that front. And of course, their in fact their arrests have been stayed, but the FIR has not yet been quashed, so it is still an open-ended question. One leading impact media group, it benched its anchor for nearly a month and a half. I mean, in fact, almost a month, because of some incorrect news reporting, for which the anchor had apologized. But since there was pressure from the government, and since it sort of directly concerned the government, the anchor, I mean, a leading face in the media, was told to cool his heels, literally, for almost a month. So uh, uh, so so it was here, that we required, in that particular organization, to stand by the anchor, because it's not that that organization was at the was among the poorer organizations as such. I mean, it also has cross media ownership, but still it did sort of kowtow to this. So I think somewhere this has to be sort of thought of, because if the media has to sort of play a role, as far as projecting the interest of the of the majority, are sort of concerned, and where if media organizations and owners themselves feel that they have a stake, in sort of preserving uh, democracy, and also in sort of protecting, the interests of the majority in this, in this country, they also ought to sort of look sort of inwards into their own practices, into their own employment practices, and at the same time simultaneously, address the challenges that the government faces. So I think it can't. So if you need, in fact, media persons to be part of that battle, against the government today, then obviously there has to be something more that has to be sort of talked about, and something more that has to be sort of looked into. So it's all part of the same, package, as I said. Yeah. Thank you, Jessim. I think I'll sort of wind up on this, on this
Thank,
note.
thank,